My sister and I slept in the same bedroom. She's 2 years younger than me. Our beds were pretty much next to each other. Next to my sister's bed was a tall wardrobe. Not a spooky one, just a white box from IKEA. It was attached to the wall and filled with our old toys. One night, I woke up to my sister sitting on her bed, mumbling quietly. She's done this before. But this time she was facing the wardrobe, so I only saw her back. I sat up quickly, remembering the previous time this had happened. I felt super uneasy. I didn't feel like somebody was in the room. I couldn't sense anything around us. I just felt scared. What I hadn't realized immediately was that my sister wasn't just facing the wardrobe, but the door was actually open. Not just a little bit, like I took something during the day and didn't notice that I left it open a crack. But it had been clearly opened during the night. We never go to that wardrobe since there's just a ton of old toys in there, nothing that we actually need. Instead of asking who she was talking to or what she was talking about, I decided to just listen. Or maybe I was too afraid to ask. I honestly can't remember. At first I only heard mumbling, and I couldn't make out anything. But then I heard her clearly ask, "What did you want to tell me?" while looking into the wardrobe. And when I shifted a little bit in my bed to look, that's when I got this overwhelming feeling of someone being in the room with us. I called my sister's name and I noticed her stiffening from hearing my voice. But she didn't turn around to face me, before quietly mumbling, "I have to go," and closing the door of the closet. After that, she seemed way sleepier, way less aware of her surroundings, like she was still asleep. But the way that she just spoke a little bit earlier and closed the door was like a completely coherent person. She seemed to be fully awake, not like she was still asleep. She fell asleep right after I told her to lay her head on the pillow and get some sleep. And once again, like the last time, she couldn't remember any of this the next morning. After the previous time, the feeling of the unsafe and dark presence disappeared. But after this time, it stayed. Every day, in every room, it felt like someone was looking at you or sitting in the shadows. It sounds spooky, but it felt even spookier. I feel like usually home is your safe place, but during that time, it felt like everything but safe and cozy. My mom experienced super vivid bad dreams. Never before had she believed us, or in any sort of presences or ghosts, or had she ever been spooked out by those things. I struggled with severe insomnia. But my little sister? She slept like a baby. Around a month after the wardrobe incident, I woke up again to the same setting. And this time I just started crying immediately from how freaked out I was. My sister was once again sitting on her bed, facing the wardrobe with her back turned towards me. This time the door was closed, but she was tapping the same door with her fingernail. Not once or twice, but continuously, while mumbling quietly. This time I immediately told her to stop and get back to bed. She put her hand down and kept mumbling, but kept facing the wardrobe. I called her name calmly again for a couple of times before she finally turned to me with her eyes closed and said, "I can't do it." I asked what she couldn't do, but then she just laid down and fell asleep. After this night, the bad energy or presence I had felt disappeared, and slowly my mom's nightmares and my insomnia left too. I still don't know what the heck was going on, but honestly, I'm just glad it stopped. I moved out about a year after that, and now my sister has her own room, so there's no telling if stuff like this keeps happening or not. But there are still times when I visit my mom's place and feel the same feeling of unsafe, especially during the nights. My little sister was around, I want to say like 6, maybe 7, when she started talking about her imaginary friend, the Red Man. She explained to me that he was a magician with a magic finger. I didn't think too much into it. We were homeschooled, and she was incredibly bored before her friends got home. So I assumed that's all it was. One day she comes running into my room, very upset and frantic. She told me, "I took his finger and now he's really angry." I tried to calm her down, again assuming that this was just a 6-year-old's imagination. But she was convinced that he was coming after her, and for a few nights I let her sleep in my bed. She stopped talking about it for a few days and acted fine. And then I was doing dishes with our brother, who's about 2 years older. He was never the type to have imaginary friends. He didn't pretend like that at all. Very analytical. So when he asked my sister if she'd seen the red man lately, I was a little shocked. Apparently he knew all about it too, and was just as convinced as our sister that it was real. So I asked him, and he said that they'd been playing with the red man and she accidentally took his finger. I was starting to get very unsettled by all of this. My sister drew pictures of him all the time. Sometimes he would look like a person. Other times he looked more like a mist. The last straw was the evening that she and I were outside late. My parents had brought a big load of groceries in. Suddenly she stiffens up and points. "He's right there," she said. I turned around to where she was pointing. Across the street, under a large tree, was an unsettling sight. A tall man thing. He was very red, and I felt total dread looking at it. My parents were very religious at the time, and they had heard all about the situation and had my sister see the priest at our church, and it all seemed to stop. I didn't think about it for a long time, until a few months ago, when my sister came to visit me at my house. She's 13 now. We were sitting outside and talking when, very casually, she said, "Do you think the red man still wants his finger back?" I'll never know if she said that to mess with me or if something very strange is haunting my baby sister. But it spooks me nonetheless. I grew up in a large, dark, and damp cliché of what everyone pictures a haunted house would look like. For more than 100 years, the house has loomed on top of a hill lined with foreboding oak trees, where murders of crows would frequently stop. I have an older sister, 7 years older, who is a problem child and very into the occult, demons, and devil worshipping. She would terrify my younger brother and I with stories, and just the general way that she would look at us blankly. When she turned about 13, she became even more rebellious. She would run away and be missing for weeks or months. She was the one who originally introduced my brother and I to the Ouija board. My mother was an alcoholic, mentally ill woman, and she was in charge of watching us kids while my dad worked the night shifts, and many times double shifts. To say that our home had a bad energy would be an understatement. We would later learn the dark history of our home from the 90-year-old woman across the street. Mrs. Looker told us that our home was built as a home for unwed mothers. Many births and deaths happened there over the years. It served that purpose for about 20 years until it was forced to be shut down, and then it was sold to a family who lived there until 1970, when my father bought it for an unbelievable price. He still lives there today. The first prefacing experience is one that I only very vaguely remember, but my mom has told me in full detail many times, and my dad, who doesn't believe in ghosts, also corroborates. My mom was outside sunbathing, and my sister was inside with a friend of hers. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a butter knife and was holding it in a fist, with the top pointed to the ground, when I slowly walked into the living room where my sister was playing with her friend. I had a blank look on my face and was shaking, and I kept repeating, "Mommy needs help. She's fighting the devil across the street in a tunnel." My sister yelled for my mom, and she came into the house and asked me what was wrong. And I just kept repeating, "Mommy needs help. She's fighting the devil across the street in a tunnel." My mom kept shaking me and telling me that she was right there and to snap out of it. She said I was in that state for about an hour, where I was just staring off into nowhere, repeating the same thing. I finally snapped back into reality and started acting normally, but I didn't remember anything. My mom was convinced that I was possessed. Later that night, when it was bath time, she noticed I had 3 bad burn marks on my shoulder that she said looked like they were from claws. It's also important to note that my mother was abandoned as a child and adopted, and herself has always been spiritual. She has experienced being saved by a guardian angel when she was young, and found herself too far away from her rural house at nightfall and felt impending danger closing in on her. She can't explain what it was, but she knew she was in danger and was very scared. She closed her eyes and opened them. Then all of a sudden, she was on her front porch, which was hundreds of yards away from where she had started. The next experience was from my younger brother's perspective. He's younger by a year and a half, and we shared a bedroom and bunks until I was 11. I slept on the top bunk, and he was on the bottom bunk. Our room was always extremely messy, with toys scattered all over. One morning at about 4 a.m., my brother woke up and said that he saw my mom crouched down cleaning up the toys. He only saw her back and her hair, which was a mix of gray and dyed blonde. My mother always wore a long, light blue flowy nightgown to bed, which was easily recognizable. He didn't think anything of it and went back to sleep. In the morning, when we both woke up, the room was spotlessly clean, and I asked him how it had happened. That was when he explained that he had seen my mom in there cleaning in the middle of the night. At breakfast, we asked her why she had decided to clean our room at such an hour, and needless to say, she told us that she had never been in the room. She went in to look and was amazed at how clean our room was, since it was never like that. Around this time, my brother started getting frequent night terrors that would scare the living crap out of me. I'd wake up to him screaming, standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall and banging his head on the wall. Sometimes he would be apologizing to God over and over. Sometimes he would be sitting in the middle of the room with his knees to his chest, hands draped around his knees, rocking back and forth and saying things that didn't make any sense while bawling his eyes out. My dad would come down the long, dark hallway to our room and try to snap him out of it. Sometimes he would slap him hard just to see if he could get a reaction, but his demeanor would never change. Eventually, my dad said to just leave him be, because nothing seemed to wake him up out of it. And if you can imagine, this was terribly scary as a kid. I'd wake up in a living nightmare, scared out of my mind, having to watch him do this, sometimes for an hour straight, until he would just climb back in bed and fall asleep. I remember one particularly scary episode when I woke up. He was just sitting on the dresser, cross-legged, with his back to the mirror, covering his eyes and crying, and just saying, "No, I won't. You can't make me look." I would try talking to him, and sometimes he would respond, but with very simple answers. I grabbed him by the hand and told him that we should get some water. He got off the dresser and followed me to the bathroom, but refused to go in. I went in and turned the faucet on so he could drink out of it. But he didn't want to go into the bathroom because of the mirror above the sink. I finally pushed him in, and he looked at himself in the mirror and let out the loudest blood-curdling scream. He was so frightened at whatever he saw that he passed out. This continued for years and would happen probably once every 2 to 3 months, always in the wee hours of the morning. When I finally moved out of that room, down the long hallway to the big bedroom at around age 11, it was almost scarier walking up and down there alone, hearing my brother's fits down the hall. Waking up in a room by myself, hearing it from far away, had a different feel. A few more important details about this house that you'll need to know is that the electrical and plumbing systems were very old and had never been updated. As a result, many lights would never work, including the most important one for me as a child, the light in the long dark hallway outside my room, which connected to my brother's room, sister's room, and the only bathroom, which was straight down the hallway. When my brother was having his fits, I'd open the door and reach my hand to flick the light. It would rarely work. If I wanted to go check on him, I'd have to run down the hallway in the pitch dark, feeling the walls to get to his room. That was the worst. So many times I'd be too scared, and I would just stay in my room with my light on. Now, the old plumbing and piping in the house meant that when you turned on a faucet, not only would it sometimes be a rusty red color for a few seconds, and then turn into clear, normal-looking water, but there was a distinct whistle sound when it came on, which intensified with a stronger stream. Many times I would wake up, and down the hallway I would hear the whistle and the water on full blast in the bathroom. I'd have to sprint down there in the pitch-dark hallway to flick on the bathroom light and shut it off. Imagine that dread for a second. Not only do you have to sprint down the hallway toward the scary noise in the dark, but you think that anything could be in that bathroom when you flick the light on. Then I'd have to sprint down the dark hall again to my room. The worst part is that after I would shut it off and get back to sleep, I'd wake up an hour later to the same thing. This happened intermittently for years. My dad always said that it was just my brother doing it to scare me, but he always denied it, and it would be a pretty elaborate hoax to pull off for so many years. The last thing I want to preface before getting into the terrifying Ouija night, although I have a few more stories I could tell, regards one of my girlfriends in my adult years. I was dating a beautiful Venezuelan woman with long black hair. We dated for about a year before I learned of her childhood in Venezuela, where she gained local notoriety as an incredibly powerful medium. Some days she claimed as many as 30 ghosts would be trying to communicate with her, and through her. It got so bad that her mother had taken her to Zimbabwe to a witch doctor who was renowned for being able to reverse or suppress the powers that mediums have whenever it got too overwhelming for them. I know, I couldn't believe it either. But when I met her mother, she told me the whole thing, and she cried while telling me the story. My girlfriend also showed me the scars on her ankles, knees, and wrists, tiny little slits that I had never noticed before, where the witch doctor cut her to drain some of her blood for the ceremony. How did this topic of her being a medium come up? Well, we were staying at a friend's house for his annual party where we were playing drinking games, hanging out in his pool, and doing a bonfire. Everyone stayed in the house, but my girlfriend and I brought my new tent and blow-up mattress and stayed in his backyard. It was a pretty rural area, and his backyard adjoined to a big cornfield. In the morning, we were pillow talking, and I thought she was just trying to scare me when she said, "Did you hear the little girl outside the tent last night?" I played along and said, "Yeah, that was creepy, right?" She said that she circled around the tent a few times and then ran into the cornfield. The whole day I didn't think anything of it, because I thought we were just playfully trying to scare each other that morning. Later that night I told my friend Mark, who owns the house, that my girlfriend said that she heard a little girl hanging around our tent. His face went white, and he said, "Wait a minute, how do you know about the little girl? Are you serious?" I said, "What are you talking about? I thought she was kidding." Apparently there's some urban myth story on his street that a little girl who went missing decades ago in the cornfields sometimes comes out at night. He said he always thought it was bull. This is when I asked my girlfriend if she'd been serious, and she did say that she actually heard the little girl. That's when she came clean with the whole medium backstory. She said after Zimbabwe her powers weren't as strong, but she would still get periodic ghosts that would try to talk to her. After I corroborated her crazy childhood medium story with her mom, I had brought her to my dad's house where I grew up so she could meet my dad, and she could only stay in the house for a few minutes before she had to leave. She said that the dread she felt in there was the most overwhelming sense of dread she had ever felt in her life, and that she never wanted to return. So, to the Ouija board night. My brother is now 20 years old, and I'm 22. My mom lives in a house in our small city's downtown area, and my brother spends a lot of his time there because she lets him drink and smoke there. He'd been there with his girlfriend playing with a Ouija board all night when I got there after a night drinking with friends. The door was locked, so I knocked. He came flying down the stairs and swished open the curtain to see me standing there. He had the literal look on his face like he had just seen a ghost. I've never seen him so scared. He just tells me to come inside and that I wouldn't believe what was going on. He says that he and his girlfriend have been playing the Ouija board, and they have this very strong, evil spirit who calls himself AZ that's been talking to him all night. He's AZ because he encompasses everything and is omnipresent, apparently. He said that AZ had been spelling out "kill mom" and saying evil things about her all night long. She was sleeping in the room next door through it all. AZ was also very vulgar. My brother said that he'd knocked down a crucifix off the wall and opened and closed the bathroom door just a few minutes before I got there. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up because I believed my brother and I felt the dread, but I didn't have proof that I had seen with my own eyes. I watched them playing, and the planchette was whipping around the board answering questions very quickly. AZ fixated on me and started by spelling out "brother." My brother asked if he wanted to talk to me, and AZ said no. He asked if he liked me, and AZ said no. I then asked my brother to tell him that I don't believe in him and that I need a sign. AZ spelled out "die." He then asked if he was going to hurt me. AZ said no, and then spelled out "mom." At that point, I went into my mom's room just to make sure she was okay, and she was. When I was in her room, I stubbed my toe and tripped a little. I came back out into the living room and told Dan that Mom was okay. My brother commanded him to leave my mother alone. He said that I wanted to see a sign, and AZ spelled out "trip." I started to feel a little wave of energy come over me, and I was thinking, did he just see me stub my toe? My brother asked him what he meant by trip, and I told him that I had just stubbed my toe and tripped in Mom's room. Then I said, asked him if he could hear me, and I started addressing him myself. AZ said that he could. I said if I write down a word on a piece of paper, would he be able to see it and spell it? And he said maybe. I asked if he would do it, and he said no. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I started to verbally abuse him a little bit, calling him a coward and some other names, and that if he really wanted us to know who he was and that he was real, he would do it. The planchette started to fly around the board without stopping anywhere, but eventually spelled out "short." I asked if it wanted me to write short words, and it replied, yes. I went to the far side of the apartment with a piece of paper and a pen, and I wrote down "sea," like the ocean. I came back, and my brother asked him if he saw what I wrote and to spell it. The planchette slowly circled around the board and landed on S, and then it slowly went to E. My heart raced and I almost started crying, but then it landed on X. My brother asked me if that was the word, and I said no. My brother started cursing at AZ, calling him a pervert and telling him to quit playing around. That was when the planchette promptly spelled out "C." I said, oh my gosh. That's when the planchette slid off the board with a pretty strong force, and my mom's cat came running out of my mom's room to the living room. It jumped on the couch and scrambled across it, and then crawled under the table. It was terrified of something. I have goosebumps every time I recount this. When my brother got AZ back on the board, I proceeded to keep playing the spelling game. Next with ocean, and then crean, and then 3 or 4 more words. Each time I would go to a completely different room and make sure that nobody could see what I wrote except for me. I folded it up and put it in my pocket so nobody could see through the paper. Every time I came back to the living room, AZ had spelled out the words with ease, faster and faster. I left the house and told my brother to be safe, and I went to my friend's house up the road, because there's no way in hell I was going back to my dad's that night. I can't really explain the feeling you get when you just know without a doubt that they are real, things that are other than you. I was overwhelmed with every emotion at the same time. Make no mistake about it, folks. They do exist. I live on the west coast of British Columbia in Canada, about midway up the coast. I was driving my girlfriend back to her granddad's house, 2 towns over from mine. It's about a 2.5-hour drive on the highways. I had driven her home and spent the day visiting her family. The town she is from is right on the coast. It's a port city. Not super important, but the point is that I spent the day there and was now getting ready to drive back home. About 25 to 30 minutes into the drive, I'm on the highway that runs parallel to the mouth of the river on one side, and the CN tracks on the other. So it goes rail on my left, the road I'm on, and then sort of a mini channel where the river ends. I'm driving, and it's getting dark, but I'm not tired or drowsy at all. There's a few rest stops along the road on my right. On the riverbank, I had to pee, so I started slowing down at the first one. And that's when some thing scurries across the road. And that's almost all that happened. It was 4-legged, at least from what I saw. And it was the blackest of black, like unnaturally dark. No texture or anything to it. It almost looked like a void of light or color in the shape of this thing. It ran out of the bush, over the rails, and I was going slow enough that the wind and highway noise was gone. And I heard it. It sounded like metal tapping as it ran over the ballast and the rail. And then there was the sound like if you took a rod of rebar or something and stabbed it into the ground. Then metal again as it ran right in front of me across the road. Its body was shaped like how some people describe a UFO, almost flat and disc-like, like an oval stretched out with the legs protruding from the front and the back. It had no features, no eyes, no face, no mouth, nothing that I could see. It ran across the road, limbs outstretched as it ran, and then it ran into the rest area and over the bank and I'm guessing into the river. This thing was huge. I'm talking like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Very big and very fast. I've tried searching this online, but I haven't had any luck. If anyone can help me figure out what I saw, please let me know. The desert is a scary place for me now. It used to be a place filled with peace and serenity. But since living out there for almost 30 years, you see things. This occurrence took place in the high desert of California in the early 1990s. The whole town was once all military. There's a military plant there and a prison. And the streets to this day consist of numbers and letters. For example, Avenue O or 178th Street. You always heard stories of people missing and underground tunnels, confirmed. In fact, a friend of mine kept getting a draft coming from his closet in his childhood home. Later, after he grew up, he checked it out and found an opening to one of these tunnels. He called me over to check it out, but after I got there and we went through the opening, I was too freaked out to go more than 10 feet. I turned around and told him, "You know, this is probably how people disappear." You always saw things late at night, off in the distance, far past the lights of that then small town. Strange, glowing, different colored lights that would move around low or zigzag, and then shoot straight up. We saw things in the sky, stuff you just don't talk about. But life was pretty carefree back then. If you wanted to visit friends, though, you would have to drive down long desert roads and sometimes end up coming home late at night in the pitch black because there were no streetlights. I remember coming home late one night with my boyfriend at the time and another friend, and we pulled over for some reason. Something compelled me to get out of the car and look up to the stars. We were in the middle of nowhere, but we could hear what sounded like machinery and muffled clanks like metal. We all started looking around but didn't see anything. Just then, we felt a vibration under our feet. I crouched down on the street and put my ear to the ground. It was coming from beneath us. We all listened intently. We could hear voices far below us but couldn't make out what was being said. We stood up and were discussing what it might have been when we saw a small red light on the horizon. It was getting closer and closer. We piled into the car and got out of Dodge. We only told a few friends, and they told us that they had experienced the same thing. A year later, I told a friend that I started a small hauling business. Still, there was a big job, so I needed to borrow a trailer. He said he had a few that I could use, so that I should come out to his property to check them out. It was just getting dark when he pulled out his new toy, military-grade night vision binoculars. He told me to wait until it got dark to leave, because he wanted to show me something creepy, and I was all in. Later, we walked toward the back of his property, looking out at nothing. No lights, no roads, nothing but a barren desert. He pointed the binoculars east, and oh my, there were people out there, coming out of the ground and moving around. I said, "What the hell am I looking at?" He told me that his family called them the ground dwellers, and that they're located in various parts of the desert. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. Needless to say, I never went to his house after dark again. At one point in my life, I lived in a mobile home park a little past Avenue F. There was a massive treehouse in my yard, which was left by a former tenant. The only way to get up into it was through a hole cut in the floor with a door on it, and under that was a rope ladder. One night, I was sitting on the porch drinking a cup of tea when I heard something move up in the treehouse. And then, a head popped up. It was a lady and her husband hiding. Clearly, I thought they were on drugs. I told them to come down from there, but they both refused. It wasn't until I threatened to call the authorities that they cautiously complied, looking all around like they didn't want to be seen. By now, there was a small group of my friends and nosy neighbors gathered around. I saw that the woman was terrified by something, so I invited them in. I made them something to eat and waited for her to calm down. Then the lady reached into her bag and pulled out some papers. They looked like legal documents with government letterhead. They were drawings and schematics, and some of them even had embossed seals. I couldn't help but notice that they had water and smoke damage, and a few of them were burnt on the edges. She told me they were checking out this place off Barrel Springs Road, where there were 2 or 3 cinder block structures. I knew them well. A few years back, I happened upon that place, and a black truck rushed down the street to greet me with guns drawn. She said the same thing happened to her, but she was in one of the structures, so she grabbed some things and she and her husband ran. I went over these pages and felt very uneasy reading them. Like this was the kind of thing people get killed over if it got out, you know? Stupidly, I said, "Why don't you just give them back?" She said they'd been running, and everywhere they stop, a black car or van with government or no plates show up with darkened windows and just sit there watching them. Well, I really didn't want to get too involved, especially after reading what I did. I thought it was too big of a lot for me. I will take what I saw to my death. I packed them lunch and told them that they could sleep in the treehouse for the night. They did, but they were gone early the next morning before I woke up. I was kind of glad. After that, we started seeing black vans parked on our lonely little road facing the house. At one point, I even walked up to one of them, but they took off as soon as I knocked on their blacked-out driver's window. Lots of unexplained things happened out there in the desert. I don't really see much of it now. I think because there are more lights and people, well-lit towns, and camera phones pointing everywhere. There really weren't cell phones back then to call for help or to gather evidence. I remember one time a few years later, it was a fun day with some of my friends. We were in this stupid little red car called a Yugo that seemed to be on its last leg most of the time. My friend's uncle told him that there was a whole abandoned town far west of the Mojave, and there were these things that were just left all over the place. We were so dumb. It took us a long time to get out there, and if you ask me to try to find it now, I don't know if I could. I wasn't driving. Thinking we were lost a few times, we started seeing things. A carnival ticket booth on a trailer, broken tractors and furniture, little shacks here and there, and empty water bottles everywhere. There wasn't a livable house or store or place of business for many, many miles. I wondered how anybody could even survive in a place like this. And then we saw it. It was long and looked like a single wide mobile home, if you could ever call it a home. It was between 50 and 60 feet long, and it was raised with the siding going all the way to the ground. It looked like something out of a horror movie. It had several windows down the length of the house. Some of the windows had old frayed curtains still hung up and blowing in the desert breeze. There were open sections of missing siding, exposing the darkness underneath the structure, big enough to step or crawl through. There were old dusty cars with their doors and trunks open, trash and open cans all over the place, and in the middle of all of this, a small fire pit. His girlfriend and I saw people that seemed to not be wearing any clothes that we could make out. Their bodies were skinny and didn't move like ours. They were inside that house, and they were watching us from the windows and from the open spaces underneath. They were following us as we slowly drove past. They went from window to window and open space to open space. The way they moved was almost inhuman, and so was their appearance. They had big eyes and pale skin, too pale for the desert. My friend, the driver, pulled up next to the fire pit. We started screaming, "Go, go, go, we have to go." He turned off the engine. His girlfriend began crying out that we had to leave now. He didn't see what we saw. "Stop, babe, the stuff is so cool." I wanted to punch him in the face. We both kept looking at the people watching us, or the things watching us, while begging him to get back in the car and drive. He picked up a long bone off the ground and started to push the soot around in the fire pit. He said, "Hey, it looks like somebody cooked a dog." Just then he looked up. His girlfriend leaned over to the driver's seat and grabbed his jacket in an attempt to pull him back in the car. That's when he finally saw what we were seeing. "Oh shit," he said. That thing hiding under the house was on all fours, swaying back and forth. His hands were on both sides of the opening, and he was staring at us, almost with the intent to lunge. He tried to start the car, but it failed. I thought this was my end, and that we were all going to be eaten in the desert by these things. I began to beat on the back of his seat, screaming, "Please, God, start!" After 3 tries, it did, and we tore out of there, leaving a cloud of dust behind us. We pulled over far from that location and tried to compose ourselves. Never, ever again. We didn't talk about what we saw after that. I think we were in disbelief that it even happened. There were so many crazy things that occurred in the desert back in those days. Too many to even come close to tell you. I know that there are things that we do not, and maybe never will, understand. I also know that there are more eyes now paying attention, so I don't think it'll be too much longer before we all know the truth. In November of 2016, my family takes me to Disneyland. We stay at an Airbnb, the whole deal. We go back to Disneyland the same day at 11 o'clock at night, trying to make the most of our money. I walk through the gates and everything goes silent. I hear the stuffed animals that people walk past me with saying, "Help me, they're going to kill me." As soon as I walk through, clear as day, I saw and felt a world of genocide. People on the floor, Middle of the day, crows picking at their bodies. Everybody on the balconies, without eyes. I thought that I was the only one left on Earth. 30 seconds later, it was over. I never saw it again, and I never told my family. If anyone has any experiences or answers, please tell me.